Hello everyone, and this is BioPhoenix here, and today we're going to be talking about the games I beat in 2020. So it's that time of year again where I get to do this video, and I have to say, I really enjoyed doing it last year, so I'm always happy to do it again. And like I said in last year's video, that this is a series I've always wanted to do, but the thing was, I never wrote everything down, and I didn't want to do a video and then be like, oh yeah, I forgot a game here and there. So yeah, now I just wrote everything down, so I never had to worry about that. So yeah, there's not much else I can say here since the title is pretty obvious. But also, just like last year, this will also be a two-part video, because I don't want this to be extremely long, like a movie length or something. So anyways, with that said, let's begin. So the first game that I beat this year happens to be Run Saber on the SNES. So this is an action platformer that plays very similar to the Strider games. And I thought it was really enjoyable. I thought it was a lot of fun, fast-paced. It was pretty challenging, but I didn't think it was stupidly hard. But then again, I also played this game on easy mode, but I thought the easy mode was fair. It wasn't too easy, but also wasn't too bullshit hard. And I really love the graphics in this game. It has a lot of really cool set pieces. I really like the character designs and the monster designs and all that. And as you can read in the caption, yes, there was actually a really badass boss in this game, which is really awesome looking. So if you really like the Strider games and you want something that's pretty similar to it, then I would recommend this one. I think it's actually really enjoyable. Although I wouldn't go as far to say it's better than it, but I would say that it's actually a really good clone of it. Alright, so the next one we got here is an indie game on Steam called Mirai? I'm not 100% sure, but pretty much this is a throwback game to the MS-DOS era. So you jump around and you shoot shit in space, and of course you gotta collect some key cards to gain access to certain areas. So yeah, just like the caption says, it's pretty much like the original Duke Nukem game before it turned to an FPS series. But I really do like the graphics in this game for that. I always did really like the old MS-DOS look to it. I always thought it looked really nice. It also really took me back to when I played this one educational game that was also an action platformer. I can't remember the name of it, but it was one where you can pick between a boy and a girl, and there was also this worm character. I don't know if anyone will know what the hell I'm talking about, but yeah, for some strange reason, when I was playing this Mirai game, it kind of reminded me of that a little bit. So yeah, as far as I know, this game is only on PC, and if you do have a PC that can run this game, which you should, I mean, even a potato can run this game, then, well, I would recommend it if you do like this sort of stuff. It's actually a really cheap and affordable game too. And also, like games from that era, it's also not a long game either, so it's a good short but sweet game. And the next one we have here is Shining Resonance Refrain, and I played this on the Switch. So this is one of the action RPGs that came from the Shining series after it moved from the tactical RPG style. It would be kinda interesting if we can get another one like that, just so we can have the rivalry between Shining Force and Fire Emblem. But with them doing action RPGs, I guess it's them trying to be the rivalry of the Tales of series. But anyways, how was the game itself? Well, I thought the game was pretty good. It wasn't amazing, but I thought it was decent. The combat in the game is pretty simplistic and easy to understand, but I thought it was decent and fun. And all the playable characters that you have all have different movesets and styles with different special attacks and such, so it is pretty fun to mess with the different ones. But as for the game's story, I think the story had its moments where it was pretty good, but then it had other moments where it was just kinda alright, it was pretty typical shit. The main character Yuma, he's pretty much a typical JRPG protagonist where, he doesn't have his memories at the beginning of the game, and he's also a bit of a wimp, and then there's the fact that he doesn't know how to talk to women properly, all that type of bullshit. But like I said though, it does have its good moments later on though. But I did find that the villains of this one were a bit more interesting though, but I'm not gonna get too much into that one though. So in case you guys are curious about wanting to try this game yourself, then one thing I will let you all know about is that there is one issue I did have later on in the game where that you get quite a few characters in your party, but unfortunately, all the characters that in your party in the back part don't get any level ups as you're using your main parties. And of course, there are some parts later on in the game where you have to forcefully use your party members that you haven't leveled up much, so because of that, this game does require a lot of grinding later on. So that really did bother me quite a lot, because I was like, ah, fuck, like, why do they have to do this to me now? But aside from that, though, I thought the game was decently enjoyable. It's not something I would, like, highly recommend to everyone, but I'd say if you can find this game for, like, dirt cheap, I think it's actually a decent action RPG. And next up we have is another Sega game, and that happens to be Yakuza 3. Now this game, on the other hand, I can recommend to way more people. Well, the series anyways, since it would be pretty weird if you started out with, like, the third game out of all the games, but anyways though, so yeah, I actually played this on the PS4 Remastered Collection, and I used to own a copy of this on the PS3, and I used to play it for quite a bit. But I never beat it for whatever reason though, and also that version actually has like way less content, so it was probably a good thing that I ended up playing this version. But anyways though, so yeah, you all know me by now, I freaking love the Yakuza games. I think they all have great stories that are like very serious, but then if you want to take a break from the serious shit, then you can do some mini games and side quests which are all goofy as shit, and that's what I love about the game. It gives you the best of both. But now, how does the third game stack up to the rest of the series, though? Well, I think the third game is really good, but I wouldn't say it's as good as, like, Kiwami 1 and 2, though. But I still think it's a good game, and I think it's because the beginning part of this game does take quite a while to get through, and it's really slow. Like, you have to do that orphanage shit for such a long time. Also, there's that, like, one part where you gotta find all the kids around the orphanage, and there's, like, that one that's hiding in, like, that hidden away bathroom that you can easily miss. Yeah, you have no idea how long it took me to get through that part, but anyways though, aside from that though, when the shit gets good, it actually does get really good, and of course I do like the setting in this one for that. It doesn't only just take place in Kamurocho, it's also in like some other area that I can't remember the name of right now, but it actually does look pretty cool though. But before we move on, one thing I do want to mention is that there is one thing that really took me by surprise, was that there is a character that actually speaks English in this game. And it does the whole Tekken thing where they're both speaking different languages, but they still understand each other perfectly. It was really amusing, so yeah, I just had to mention that. But yeah, overall, a good entry in the series. So the next game we got here is a indie game that I got off PSN that was like dirt cheap, and that happens to be Redbow. So this is a top-down adventure game of a horror setting, so I guess it could be like an old school survival horror, I guess. So yeah, the game is like really short, which explains like the main price of the game. It's like $5. That's not even like without like a sale or anything. You can get it even cheaper than that. So knowing that, it is one of those really short linear games, and I'm fine with that. I mean, as long as they're done well. But as for this one, well, I thought it was kind of cute and charming. I don't want to talk too much about the story here because, well, the story is pretty much like the main reason why you'd want to play a game like this, so if you're curious and you do have like some chump change, then, well, I would say give it a try. But to sum up what it's about is that you play as this one female character and you travel to different horror lands, and well, you're trying to get back to your main home, but before you go back home, you gotta help out these other people with their problems, and they're all like really weird and shit. So I did find it to be somewhat intriguing, but yeah, it's nothing super uber amazing, but I thought it was entertaining for its short runnings. But I will give it credit that it did have some pretty cool sounding sound effects though, so I thought that was actually pretty nice. And next up here is yet another horror game, and yet I didn't even play these in October, and that happens to be Deadly Premonition Origins. Good old Deadly Premonition. Well, what can I say? So, my experience with the game was that I actually played it a couple years ago on the 360, but I never beat it though because I got stuck at a part because I kept dying and running out of ammo on my SMGs. So, because of that, I rounded up just putting the game off for now and wanting to get back to it, but I just never did. But eventually though, the Switch version came out and I was like, well, I kind of want to support this because I was really liking the game. Yes, believe it or not, I was actually liking the game. I actually thought it was a very charming and amusing game that actually has like a really cool story. So to get the elephant out of the room first is that yes, the game is pretty jank in a lot of areas, but is it like the worst game ever? No, it's not the worst game ever, but I can understand why people would not like the game though. So yeah, after all this time, I'm actually glad that I finally beat this one because weirdly enough, despite the fact that I took a break from the game and I was really liking the story, the game's ending and the plot twists that happened within it were never spoiled for me. And I'm glad I was able to see it for the first time in 2020 because man, I thought it was really cool. Very weird, but it's the kind of weird shit that I like. So yeah, I mainly played through this game because of the story, but as for the gameplay, well, I thought the gameplay was enjoyable enough, mostly for an amusing, like, comedy aspect of it, because it's just so, like, weird but funny, but I actually do think that the game was very playable though, despite some of the issues that it has. I honestly think the most annoying issue, at least within the Switch version, is that the driving controls are kind of fucked up, and it's weird because the 360 driving controls are fine, so I have no idea what happened there. So yes, if you really like weird, experimental, like, survival horror, but also meets, like, open world, and also has, like, a really cool story, and you also like some goofy shit, then, well, this is it. This is the game for you. But I'm not sure if the Switch version would be like the definitive version to play for that. It doesn't have the director's cut ending that was in the PS3 version, although I've heard that version also has its other like weird issues too. And it does have its minor things that are just not as good as like the 360 version, but with that said though, it is probably the most easy access version to get a hold of because unfortunately the 360 version actually went up in price last I checked, so that's really unfortunate. And also the PC version is like the absolute worst version like ever made, so yeah, don't bother with that one. Yeah, so much for the PC Master Race, right? So yes, believe it or not, I actually liked Deadly Premonition. I give no fucks. And next up we have is Mujin Guy on the PS2. So this is a 3D hack and slash beat 'em up or whatever you want to call it, where you get to play as Gak-T or Gact or whoever, you know, that Japanese musician. Who, by the way, I actually do like a couple songs from, so when I found out about this game, I actually had no idea it was even related to Gak-T at all, but when I found out, I was like, well shit, that actually makes the game even better. But if I were to compare this game to another game from its time, I would say it's kinda like Devil May Cry, where that, you know, you go into an area, they get blocked off, and then you gotta fight a bunch of enemies, and then, like, the gates go down, and then you just gotta go to the next area and do the same shit. And of course, there's also some platforming here and there you gotta do as well. And you gotta kick the shit out of some giant-ass bosses. And yeah, this game is full of action, and I really love it a lot. I still think it controls pretty well. And in a way, I would say this game is actually better than Devil May Cry 1 and 2. I don't know about Devil May Cry 3, but I would still say that it is a worthy contender as being one of my favorite hack and slash games on the PS2. Plus, the game has some really awesome music, although weirdly enough, they don't have any Gak-T music as far as I remember, but the music itself is still really good. And as for the game's story, well, the story is there, it exists, it's not really the most memorable, but you know, you're just there to kick some ass, so it's kinda whatever, it works. But it does have some funny voice acting, so I guess that makes up for it. But yeah, this was surprisingly a really good game that I can definitely recommend if you really like this type of stuff. And next up we have is the AI Somnion Files, which is a game that I have talked about quite a few times on my channel this year. So knowing that I've been talking about it a lot, you can probably take a guess that yes, I absolutely love this game. It's probably one of my favorite games that I actually beat this year, but of course, it is a visual novel, so it's not one I can easily recommend unless, you know, you're totally okay with visual novels. But to sum up what you need to know quickly in case you don't know anything about the game is that you play as a detective named Dante and you have to investigate a serial murder case with people getting their eyes removed. And the department that you work for happens to have a secret machine that is not revealed to the public where you can actually go inside people's minds and you can solve the crime within. It's not the most original concept, but I feel like the way that they did it here was really cool and interesting. Also, I'm kind of a sucker for that kind of stuff, as you can read with the caption down there. So whenever you go inside a character's mind, that's where all the puzzle sections get to. But one other thing I should mention is that your main character actually has a mechanical eye that actually has a mind of its own, and they actually have some really funny dialogue together. In fact, the dialogue in this game in general, I would say is like highly entertaining and just very good shit. But in case you didn't know, this game was made by the same creator as the Zero Escape games, so if you played those, then you might have an idea of what it's like in here, and I just really love it a lot. So yeah, I can't praise the story enough, it's just fantastic, but as much as I do love this game, I do have one minor complaint with this game, but it has nothing to do with the story, it has to do with the gameplay aspect, is that for the puzzle rooms, there's a time limit, and as you know me, I am not a fan of time limits. And of course, the time limits do make sense with the game's story. It's not like, oh no, you ran out of time and you will just randomly die. No, it's not like that. It actually makes sense with the story because you can't go inside the sleep machine for too long because you'll actually like get lost or something. You can't return to your body. But the thing about it that I'm not a fan of is the fact that, like, there's so many, like, different, like, funny dialogue stuff that you can do within, like the puzzle rooms that are, like, not mandatory, but you can do them because they're funny and they're, like, there, right? Well, if you want to actually, like, do, like, the main stuff, well, everything takes time, so of course, it kind of defeats the purpose of trying to, like, mess around and do all, like, the funny stuff, because, you know, you're just gonna be wasting time, and then, of course, you know, if you spend too much time, then you're gonna have to, like, redo, like, the entire thing all over again, because you kept fucking around too much. Hopefully I explained it well, but yeah, pretty much that I just wish it didn't have a time limit. I wish you can actually view everything that the game offers without the time limit shit. But with that one complaint aside, this really is a great game that I cannot praise enough. So next up we have is Tails Adventure on the Game Gear. Bet you weren't expecting this game to pop up, so yeah, this game is actually considered a guilty pleasure because I mentioned it in my guilty pleasure video I did earlier on. So without going too much into it, yeah, this is a game that I actually do kinda like. It's not amazing, but I think it was actually pretty enjoyable for what it was. It was very different for like a Sonic spin-off. So it's a platformer that you use Tails, but it's not about speed. Instead, it's all about trying to get through the levels by using your gadgets and upgrades. And I find this game kind of has like a Metroidvania feel to it because you'll need to like go back to like some of like the older levels to use like a gadget that you got in a later level to access like newer areas and such, so I do kind of like that aspect of it. So knowing that, it can be a little bit confusing on trying to figure out where exactly you're supposed to go. And I remember playing this game on the Sonic Gems collection. I actually used to get lost all the time, and of course, I didn't have internet, so I wasn't able to look it up, but now that I do have internet, well, I finally got through the game. And after all these years, yeah, I still like this game for what it is. It's very weird and kinda different, but I thought it was somewhat enjoyable. But I do wonder if there are fans out there that will actually make like a definitive edition of Tails Adventure. I think that would actually be pretty cool. And next up we have is a game that I've been wanting to beat for a long time, and that happens to be Xenosaga III. Now, before we get to the game, I do have a pretty funny, weird story with this game, is that, believe it or not, Xenosaga III was the first Xenosaga game I ever played. Yeah, so get this. So, when I first got my PS2 in about, like, 2005, 2006, it was somewhere around there. One of the games that I was really interested in wanting to play on my PS2 was the Xenosaga games, and when I was trying to find them, I couldn't find any of them, except for the third game. They actually had a brand new copy of it at the time because, you know, it came out like not that long ago, so I bought it, and I played a bit of it, and of course, I really liked it, but I didn't really fully understand most of the story, but I could kind of piece a little bit of things here together. But I really felt like that I should play the first two games, so eventually I did, and I took a break off this one, and let me tell you, it actually took me like 3 PS2s just to beat the first game. Yeah, like what the fuck, but I won't go into that because that's like a whole other story. So anyways, with all that shenanigans aside, yes, it was finally great to play this game while also understanding everything that happened before then. And I still think this is a great entry in the series. Definitely way better than number 2, that's for damn sure. So the game has a different combat system, but I think that's probably for the better, given that the second game's gameplay was such asshole. So yeah, the combat is still turn-based, but it's more simplified than how it was in the first game, but like I said, I think it was probably for the better that they went with this way. But the combat system is still good, it's just not as, like, unique as the first game was, but that's fine though. And as for the story, well, without getting too much into it, I can say that the story is pretty damn great, and it was really satisfying to see the way how it ended. Even though it is a shame that, there were supposed to be more episodes than 3, but I still thought that it was a good ending that was satisfying enough for me. And I should also mention that the graphics for this game were really good for PS2, like there were some really nice backgrounds and set pieces, and also the game's music was really great as well. The only unfortunate thing about the music is that there's still quite a few sections in the game where there's like dead silence and all you can hear is like your footsteps, which are like loud as shit by the way. So while the music is still really good, I just wish there was a lot more, like, soundtracks for, like, like the towns and, like, the hotel room and such. I felt like they really could have used some lively, good music. And in case you guys are wondering, yes, I did manage to do that side quest to get Edergeiser, like, Omega or whatever. Like the robot guy that you can, like, summon in battle. Yeah, I got, like, the maximum one, which is basically, like, the beat a game button. Or if you played Grandia 2 before, it's also known as the Sky Dragon Slash button. And let me tell you, trying to get that shit was not easy, but it was well worth it though, because it made like the last boss like stupid easy, but it was still awesome as hell though. So without rambling on way too much about the game, all I'm gonna say is that 1 and 3 are still great games, just fuck 2 though. And next up we have is Trace Memory on the DS. And yes, even though this game was a launch title, I really didn't know a whole lot about the game back then. But after playing it for the first time finally this year, all I have to say is that I thought it was a pretty nice game. So to sum up the story is that you play as this character named Ashley who goes on an island because she receives a letter from her father saying that her father is actually still alive and that he might be on this island. So when she ends up going there, she ends up meeting up with this like ghost guy, and of course she wants to find out like who this ghost like really is, and then of course she has to like go inside like a mansion and do all this like type of puzzle stuff, and yeah, that's pretty much all I'm gonna say about it there. But yeah, I did like the game for what it was. I thought it was a pretty interesting story that had some really interesting moments. But what I really loved the most though would have to be the graphics. I just really loved the pre-rendered backgrounds. I still thought they looked really good on the DS. Also the game's like relaxing music was really good too. It really fit the game perfectly. And after playing the game, it really made me want to play the sequel that came out on the Wii, which unfortunately never came out to North America, but it did come out in the PAL region, so it is in English, but sadly, the game does not emulate the best. Apparently it's very playable, but it still has some minor issues. But one day though, I will get around to it, but maybe until then, I'll just play some Hotel Dusk, because that's another one that's been on my backlog for a while. And next up we have is Streets of Rage 4, a game that I never thought would have happened because it seemed like Sega was like, nah, fuck Streets of Rage, we don't want that shit, we're gonna continue making shitty ass Sonic games from now on. Man, I am so glad that that shit is over with because now we're actually getting good games again. So yeah, if you played any of the Streets of Rage games before, then you'll know exactly what this is. And I really love the art style here, I think it's really cool looking. The music is decent, but then again, I just put it to the old music because I think it's way better. But the new music is okay, it has its decent tracks, but it's definitely a little disappointing though. It has a lot of levels and different characters with different play styles. Overall, I would say this is just a really damn good beat 'em up. And it's about time that we get another good beat 'em up, because it seems like that a couple of the ones that I have played before on like PS4 and the Switch are just kinda okay or mediocre or just bad. But this one, nah, this one's actually really damn good. And there's actually a couple other good ones too that I've been meaning to get around to as well. So I don't need to say much here, just play it. And next up we have is Arcus Odyssey on the Sega Genesis. So this is a top-down isometric view action game, and it happens to be a part of the Arcus series, which the mainline series has never been released outside of Japan, which I'm still hoping will get a fan translation someday. So yeah, Arcus Odyssey is a pretty damn fun game. I actually thought it was really cool. I love the graphics, the music is really awesome. In fact, it's composed by Motoi Sakuraba, so that's always a great thing. And the game actually has co-op play, which is pretty nice, but of course I beat it by myself, as the elf character. So yeah, this game is not really a long game, but of course it does have its challenging parts, mostly being the boss battles, but every other part though wasn't too bad, though there are some parts where I did die a couple times, but for the most part though, I would say the game is very manageable. So yeah, if you really like games like this, then this is one I would recommend. I found it to be really enjoyable. Alright, so the next one we got here is Holy Umbrella on the SNES. Yes, what a random ass name that is. So this was a Japan-only game that got fan-translated, and I thought the game looked pretty interesting. I thought about reviewing it, but I just decided to play it for myself. So it's an action platformer with some very light RPG elements, and I mean very light because it's mostly just grinding out to get more money to buy items and such. So in that regards, it does remind me a little bit of the game Spike McFang that I beat last year, but only that this one is more side-scrolling. So yeah, this game has a lot of comedy bits that are pretty damn amusing. For an example, this evil emperor guy is always chasing you around, but every time he tries to like do anything, like he always just fails, and it's just really funny the way how they go about it. So to sum up the story is that you play as this kid that you get to name whatever you want, and you're stuck in this weird world where you get transported there by an umbrella. Yeah, it's pretty goofy. And along trying to get back to your home world, you meet a bunch of different characters, and of course you can actually play as those other characters, and they have different playstyles and have different abilities and such, so it's actually pretty cool. And one good thing that I will say about this game is that it's very forgiving, so whenever you die at like a boss battle, like you literally start right at the boss like again, so there's no like, oh I gotta go backtrack to do all this shit all over again, so it's actually pretty handy in that regards. But as good as this game sounds though, the game's controls are a bit on the stiffer side, but it's not unplayable or anything like that, but it is something that is worth noting because they do take some time to get used to with the game's movement speed. So overall I would say that Holy Umbrella is pretty enjoyable and I liked it for what it was. It was a good, fun, charming little game. So I may not have reviewed it on my channel officially, but I guess this counts for something, right? So next up we got is Vanquish. So this isn't the first time I played this game. I did play it a couple years ago on my PS3, but for some reason I never got around to beating it on that version, but it wasn't until when I got the Steam version that I was able to play through the game, and man, let me tell you, this game is just a hell of a great time, and it's probably my favorite Platinum Games game, if you could believe it. It pretty much has all this type of stuff that you want for a third-person shooter, where that, you know, you have some duck and cover systems, you also have like a nice flashy like slow motion thing going on, which is fun, and you got some pretty fun weapons to use. And plus, I really do like the game setting for that, like everything is all like machinery and such, so you're just like shooting the shit out of some cool looking robots. But the story, however, I do feel is pretty forgettable and is just kind of there, so, you know, it's one of those games where it's just mindless fun entertainment where you just get to blast the shit out of a bunch of enemies, and you know what? That's exactly what I came here for. And next up we have is Sonic 3D Blast on the Sega Saturn. Now just like I said about Tails Adventure, this is another Sonic game that is not the most popular. But personally for me though, I do like this version. I would at least say that it's like a bajillion times better than the Genesis version. Not only does it look nicer with its like weather effects, but also I really love the OST in this game. It is like way better than the Genesis version. It's almost like night and day. And of course, I just think that the controls just feel better for me on this one. So I'm sure as you know, this one plays very differently, and it was originally going to be a flicky game, but then they just made it to a Sonic game at last minute. But even turning it into a Sonic game, I still think it actually plays pretty decently well, though it does have its frustrating parts later on in the game, but I still think it was a pretty enjoyable game for what it was. Also, trying to get all the Chaos Emeralds is a real bitch in this game. And one thing that really took me by surprise when I beat this game was that the song at the credits almost sounds like something out of the game Sonic R, and I was like, well shit, this almost sounds like a Sonic R song that I never heard before. So I thought that was pretty amusing, but yeah, I would say out of all the versions of Sonic 3D Blast, this one is probably my favorite. I also heard that the PC version is not that much different, so I guess that one would also be really good too. But it's still not a game that I can easily recommend though, because like I said, this game still has its frustrating aspects. And while I can see some people just not liking the perspective that the game's in, because, you know, a Sonic game that's in an isometric view, I will admit, it is kinda weird. Alright, so now as for the last game we're going to be mentioning in part 1 is a game called Griss. So just like I said about the game Redbow, this is one of those games I got on PSN for like super cheap, and I figured, why not? I mean, what's the worst that can happen, right? I mean, the game looked really interesting to me, so I figured, why not? So it's a puzzle platformer where you're in this like really brightly colored aesthetic world. Yeah, this is another very aesthetic game out there. So the character that you use can turn into like different shapes and for abilities that you get to use to bypass certain puzzles and areas, and you know, the game is actually not hard at all despite it being a puzzle platformer. I found it to be a lot easier than most others that I've played. But I would say that the game overall is decent. It's nothing overly amazing, but I thought the game was at least intriguing for its runtime for me, mostly because of like, I really love the way the graphics look. I love the animation going on, like that part where like the bird is like blowing at you. Like the animation at that part was just freaking awesome looking. And the game's music is very fitting to the game. It's very relaxing, and yes, it's aesthetic as fuck. So if you do like games like this, and you really do love the way it looks, I would say that this is one that is worth getting on a sale. So that takes care of part 1 for games I beat in 2020, so stay tuned for part 2 if you want to hear me more ramble on about random ass other games I've beaten, so take care in the meantime.